MTR talks about pre-code Hollywood films. Don't know about the Hollywood Production Code? You don't know about the Hays Commission? Well, film historian Dick Segreto and industry worker B. George Smith fill in the gaps on this part one of a two-part series on pre-code Hollywood films, the late 1920s into July of 1934.
Well, you know, PreCode Films was an era of films that I really never paid any attention to be honest with you.
But you liked old movies.
I liked old movies, and I never really thought of PreCode because I really didn't know anything about PreCode Films as a defined time frame of films.
Yeah.
I've heard of the Hollywood Production Code, and I figured there had to be a PreCode time, but I didn't know that there was a big deal about Hollywood PreCode films. Like, for example, most people think old classic films, the old black and white films of the 30s, as being basically all comedies, romantic comedies.
Gangsters is what I
Gangsters,
remember.
a lot of gangster films. But for the most part, they looked at them as kind of hokey and kind of sappy. I mean,
well, some were comedies, some were murder drama kind of things.
But most of the gangster movies were in the early part of the 30s.
Okay.
That fell into the pre-code, like Little Caesar, Public Enemy. But I didn't know until recently how important the films were during that era.
Well, important as in different from maybe a movie I might remember, sappy, goofy, nothing controversial, nothing even a little bit tawdry. It didn't occur to me. I just thought that was the era of the day. But what I've now learned from you is that there was the pre-code time when there was some racy stuff, some tawdry stuff, some quite, well, a lot more flesh, a lot more women being bold and serious. Tell me about that.
Yeah, for example, in one of my favorite films, and I talk about it in just about all my presentations, is It Happened One Night. There's a scene in a cabin where they're preparing to go to bed. Well, they have twin beds, and they even mention the wall of Jericho, which is a blanket between the two beds, so that Claudette Colbert's character could undress to go to bed.
And very, very sensual for a lot of people even today.
But pre-code films, we had women undressing on the screen.
And see, yeah, that's not something, I don't know if they play that so much anymore on the TCMs or whatever, but that's not anything I remember.
TCM, I get their schedule, and I've seen where they talk about pre-code and event, and oftentimes we'll have pre-code films as maybe an evening or a weekender. But every once in a while they'll do
a whole
pre-code.
lot more ladies with skin showing in this era, and a whole lot more ladies being what we would call today women's liberated women with attitude, women with gusto, women with guts and moxie.
Right. Well, the first film in that pre-code era that was of any substance at all was a movie called The Divorcee with Norma Shearer, who happened to be the wife of Irving Thalberg, the head of MGM Studios.
Well, that's convenient.
Yeah, yeah. But she had to struggle to get the role because all the roles that she was playing prior to that were kind of the good girl roles, and she wanted to change her style and play more sensuous roles. So she did a photo shoot and did a lot of photo shots of her in lingerie in order to convince her husband and the producers to give her the role.
Divorcee, very early 30s, right?
1930.
Okay, yeah.
And so she got the role. And the actress who was originally scheduled to be cast for that role was Joan Crawford. And she was quite upset because she didn't get that role.
And she was like big box office
Oh,
back
she was
then.
big box office.
Yeah.
And the last film of that pre-code era was a film called Babyface, which you and I saw a few weeks ago.
That's how I started this journey with you on pre-code, looking at Babyface with Barbara Stanwyck.
And John Wayne has a brief two scenes, a couple of lines in the film.
Handsome man, but very young.
Very young. That was 1933.
Released,
and that film actually could not be released because it was
Oh, so controversial.
So controversial
Yeah.
that they, in order to get it released, they did about 20 minutes of cuts. And the film that we saw was the uncut version,
Yeah.
which they found. It was presumed lost, and it was found in the Library of Congress. So I recommend it if people want to see really a good film of that pre-code era, depicting women as very strong characters, using their sexuality to rise above in her status in society. I recommend you see that, rent it from the library or wherever you can get it. Make sure it's the one that's not been cut.
And it's longer, but none of these movies, that was an era when movies were maybe 90 minutes, maybe about 70 minutes. Some of them were only in the high 60s.
Yeah.
A feature back in those days wasn't all that long.
Right.
There was, I'm trying to think of something, famous movie. It was more like 90-something minutes, which was long, and I want to think it was shucks. What was the movie with James Cagney?
The Public Enemy?
I think that was a longer movie.
It was a longer movie, very
but
violent
still only
film.
about 90-something minutes long.
And that was one of the pre-code films.
Right.
Co-starring Mae Clarke and Jean Harlow. And Mae Clarke is the actress who had the grapefruit punched into her face by Cagney. Very famous scene.
No, what I'm thinking of, it was fairly long, and they had an edited version of it too. Tarzan and His Mate. Also, was that pre-code?
That was pre-code,
Yeah.
and that's the only Tarzan series with Johnny Weissmuller and Maureen O'Sullivan that she wore a two-piece
jungle outfit or
jungle
whatever.
outfit,
Yeah.
and it was very revealing. I mean, it was almost like a thong by today's standards.
Oh, yeah.
And Tarzan's loincloth was very revealing as well. And then after the code went into effect, I think they made about 4 or 5 more.
Then
they made her in one piece, and he had a loincloth that was covering
much
his...
less skin.
Yeah.
Much more what we would call modest, I guess, by today's. But still, I remember seeing some Tarzan movies. Now, I can't say I remember seeing a pre-code Tarzan when I was a kid, but I thought, well, I don't know what I thought as a kid, but looking back on it as an adult, so much of what was going on was to me real, and yet it was studio-based shooting, primarily. But still, a lot of skin. Black and white movies, but a lot of skin.
Another scary movie that I saw on television was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where he goes through that transformation of being human
classic.
to an animalistic, horrendous...
That's a fantastic film that more people should go back and review. The original Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
That's another one that's in that pre-code era.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Frederick March, he won his first Oscar for that role.
Well, so jumping forward, we haven't really delved into why there became a code. So let's go backwards first.
The Hollywood production code came about because of a lot of scandals during the 20s involving high-profile Hollywood celebrities. There were murders, there were rapes, there was all kinds of...
Some were alleged.
Some were alleged.
Okay,
one of them
a lot of publicity.
that was ruined...
Fatty Arbuckle.
Roscoe Fatty Arbuckles, one of the most popular comedic actors of the silent film.
That included a death and an alleged rape.
Right. And it was he was
charged with
proven
murder.
in court that he was not involved, so he was finally exonerated cleared from the case, but
it ruined him.
It ruined his career.
But it was one of those things in the roaring 20s that what I'm remembering from my history books is that eventually the church and the more modest people of America kind of just got sick and tired of seeing Hollywood so in debauchery.
Well, even in the
early Prohibition.
Right. Even during the beginnings of the film industry, there were a lot of people that thought films represented an evil effect and had a evil morality on people's character. That was just what was portrayed in the film. So Hollywood felt that there was coming of pressure from the federal government of cleaning up their act.
Well, there were overt, more than rumors,
Right.
of clean up your act or else we're coming down on you.
Right. And so they, in 1930, in March of 1930, developed this long list of recommended guidelines for the studios to follow. It was called the Hollywood Production Code. And they, to head that program up, they hired a former postmaster general, a very Christian man named William Hayes. And the code often, in the early days, was referred to as the Hayes Code. But it was only a recommendation. It was only guidelines. It was nothing put in force until July of 1934. It was a result of the film Babyface having so many things that it broke all the rules in the code that they finally said, now a motion picture after March of 34 had to have a certificate from the code in order to be released.
Gotcha. And thus Hollywood sort of obviated is not the word, but avoided a governmental ruling coming down on them.
Right.
They kind of tried to self-regulate. Well, 1915, there was a freedom, you could argue freedom of speech, unless 1915 Supreme Court ruled in some case that motion pictures did not fall under the First Amendment's rights to freedom of speech. That was a wild ruling. I don't know the details of it, but there's something in there. And I do know that in 1952 that was repealed. SCOTUS, or the Supreme Court, ruled in the opposite direction, that motion pictures did have the First Amendment rights under freedom of speech in the United States Constitution, which changed their freedoms again.
Right. Well, the code was in effect from 1934 till probably mid-late 50s, and what changed it was the import of a lot of foreign films, which changed the mode, and then finally in 1968 Hollywood implemented their letter code of
GP firstly, then R, then X, and eventually GP became PG, then PG-13. I think they finally kind of got rid of X.
Well, they got pretty much so. But what was interesting is that when we talk about the code films and their guidelines, just about, and there were pages and pages of what you can say, what you can't say, what you can do or not do, or screen or film or not film. There was just so much of that.
It was a contract. It was like a very detailed
And by
thing.
today's standards, probably 99% of the elements that are in the code are actually
requirements
for box office hits. Nudity, sex, drugs, violence, drunkenness, interracial sex. I mean, it was just all kinds of things.
Homo and hetero. Almost, But so that's odd. That is not odd, but that's an interesting comment. Today's movies have that almost as a requirement to be publicly seen, whereas it became a taboo back in those days.
Well, you remember last year, one of the most popular films was The Wolf of Wall Street.
Well, it got an Oscar nods, but I can't say it was popular. I don't know how many people went to it.
I thought it was a box office hit. I don't know. Maybe. But the bottom line was, that was a film that was 3 hours long. It was one of the few films I walked out of. 3 hours long and an hour and a half of drugs, drunkenness, sex,
and it didn't even really need all of that for the story. It just, I think they were just trying to sell more tickets to people who wanted to see boobies.
Yeah.
And people doing cocaine.
Yeah.
And cussing a lot. I just get so tired of a lot of cussing in films.
Now, in late 1959, there was a popular film. It was a jury trial.
Oh, yeah. Anatomy of a
Murder, 1959.
Jimmy Stewart,
Jimmy Stewart, directed by Preminger, starring Ben Gazzara, Lee Remick, and George C. Scott. It was a courtroom drama about a husband on trial for murdering his wife's rapist. Now, what made that film so significant was it was the first film in film history that used words of women's panties, girdle, dress, the violence of the act of rape, and using the word rape and sperm and sexual completion and all of that. And it was banned in many cities, including Chicago. But that's a film that I think people should see.
So
It's an excellent film.
59.
1959.
The era. Well, Preminger knew he was pushing buttons, and I bet he. Well, first of all, they're making making a movie based on a popular book. So you've got to somehow stay true to that, but I bet he was pushing the buttons of the film community so he could make better box office.
Oh, I'm sure, and it was a big box office. In fact, we saw that film.
Particularly because of the sort of the raciness and the scandal.
Right.
You get buzz going, that's better than any paid advertising.
Sure.
Yeah,
in
word
fact,
of mouth.
in the original days of the pre-code, there were communities, cities and states where had their own censorship boards.
Correct.
And they could order to have certain scenes deleted or even ban a film within their borders.
Yeah.
But what Hollywood would do is if a film was banned, they would use it as publicity to sell it in other markets.
Yep. Yep. Oh, well, I don't know if it applied to the movies, but there used to be a phrase, I remember people going, it was banned in Boston. I don't know if that had anything to do with the movies, but that phrase used to make people want to see something or be a part of it if some other more puritanical place had banned it.
Well, if I was to kind of sum up pre-code, is that I've seen several films now in that pre-code era, and I have seen just a different, seems like this is just a different look on the screen than after 1934.
Well, the few that I've been able to survey with you, women are strong and independent, if not actual killers and adulterers and prostitutes on purpose. After the code went into effect, it had to be like goody-goody two-shoes and everybody's happy and it's all Caucasian white America, can't nothing go wrong.
Right, exactly.
Well, yeah, it sanitized it, yeah.
This nice discussion. Pre-code films, 1930 to 1934.
Check them out. Thanks, Dick.
You bet.